Okay, we did this grafting workshop on Zoom here a couple weeks ago now, or a week and a bit ago, and the recording didn't work at all, and the audio apparently was not that good either. So I'm going to do this over again. I'm just recording it on Zoom. There's no one on this meeting but me, but we'll cover the same stuff, and hopefully I can get this thing on YouTube for people. So we're talking about grafting apples. Many of these concepts apply to grafting other things, but it's also important to know that every fruit species has its own idiosyncrasies and characteristics, and so learn about any given thing before you try and graft it. That said, what we've got is we've got some M111 rootstock. Got a couple of them. We'll do a cleft graft, which is the easy one everyone should learn. And then we'll do a whip and tongue graft too, which I don't really recommend, but I'll show to you. I mean, I use it myself. I don't recommend it because it's really easy to cut yourself doing that. And until you kind of get comfortable with the knife, I don't think it's worth trying. I've gotten to the point where now I don't cut myself, but first couple of years I cut myself several times pretty badly, and these grafting knives are very sharp. So let's see. Let's talk about just things that you need to have on hand first. You need to have the rootstocks. I order them. You can order small quantities from places like Rain Tree Nursery or Cummins Nursery. You can search those on Google and find them. If you want larger quantities, like 25, 50 or more, I recommend ordering them from Copenhagen Farms. You can Google them, or Willamette Nurseries. You can Google them. Those are both in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and good prices, good quality. And then you're going to need scionwood too. And we're not going to talk about how to collect scionwood here, but that's something you need to know how to do. If you don't acquire it some other way and you need to cut your own, you need to know how to take care of it, store it. What I do is when I get dormant pieces of scionwood, this little tapered part at the end, I'm going to do over. Here's a piece of scionwood though. This is for an apple called golden russet. This is last year's growth. So the tip of this branch was somewhere down here. I cut a piece off, right? Was somewhere down here last year before this thing started growing. So this time last year, it's early April right now, and it grew this whole amount plus a little bit on the tip last year. That's what you want. If you follow back from the tip all the way down to where last year's growth ends, you usually see very close together buds and sort of a ring-like structure around the tree. So anyway, this is what you use. Once you get them, I get these gallon-sized Ziploc type bags. I get a little piece of paper towel, moist, wring it out really well. We don't need a lot of water in there, we just need it moist. And then I put a rubber band on the scionwood, and I keep the paper towel away from the scionwood because it's going to harbor some bacteria and fungus and stuff. And then I kind of just roll it all together and stick it in the fridge. Also, and this is optional, but if you're going to store scionwood for very long, I'll take a little tea light candle like this and light it until I have a little pool of wax in there, and then I'll just dip the ends of the scionwood in there, and you might be able to see, yeah, you can see a little white wax from one of these tea lights on the end of this piece of scionwood. That keeps it from losing water as fast, and it's important for keeping it alive that you don't just have water evaporating out of this thing. So that's the candle for sealing your scionwood. Then you're going to need some things to cut with. Need a pair of hand pruners. These are bypass pruners. You can see this, the blade on this side here goes past this part down here. Makes a much nicer cut. There's also anvil type pruners where this is just like a flat thing that the blade hits against, but those tend to crush the wood, so I wouldn't get those if you have an option. Felco 8 is the one I have here. And these ones will last you forever if you want to buy a pair. They're about 50 bucks, I think, something like that. There are other ones out there. And then you're going to need a grafting knife. This is a cheap one from Victorinox and also sold by Felco. Single blade, completely straight edge on it. And if you could look at it along the edge like this, you would see that it's only beveled on one side. Not both sides like a kitchen knife, just one side. And the reason for that is it makes it a lot easier to cut a planer cut across a piece of this scionwood or across your rootstock. And oftentimes you need a planer cut like that. If you only have a kitchen knife that's real sharp or a pocket knife, bevel on both sides, you can try and use it, and you probably have some success. But if you have one of these, it makes it a little bit easier. And for me, it's worth having. These are about $20, a little less, something like that. Then, need something to sharpen these things with. This is a little diamond encrusted stone, I guess you call it. It's got a coarser side and a finer side. And I happen to know that the bevel on this blade is on the bottom side of it. And I need to make sure this is nice and sharp before I do any work. So I'm not going to go through it here because I actually sharpened a little while ago, but just to show you the kind of thing you do, I'm going one way on it. You should read or look up on YouTube some examples of how to sharpen knives so you can get a good sharp knife yourself. You want to have a super sharp blade. That is the safest and the quickest, easiest thing to do. Once I've done it on the coarse side, on the red, then I'll flip it over and do it a little bit on this side. I'm just showing you what the strokes look like. It actually takes me another 30-40 seconds to bring this thing up to perfect sharpness, but as I said, I sharpened it not long ago and it should be fine. If I'm doing a whole lot of grafting, I'll sharpen this thing about every 10 grafts or so. All right, so we got the knives. Also need some isopropyl alcohol. If you can find it in the store right now, you're really lucky because the pandemic has made it really hard to find. But this is to sterilize your blades between cuts. You can pour some on a piece of cloth and wipe the blades with that. The reason we do this is that there may be disease in scionwood that we get, especially if it's scionwood that we're not buying from someone who's really adept at growing healthy scionwood, but we're getting it from a friend or something like that. So we want to make sure we have sterile blade when we make cuts so that we don't infect the next thing from whatever we were cutting last time. Same thing goes for alcohol on the hand pruners. Now I just poured a little bit on in the little gap in there, but now I got to open it up and make sure that it gets on all sides. A piece of cloth would be a better thing to use than my fingers, but there we go. I'm going to wipe it off on my pants. Use what you've got. Let those dry. So we've got sterile cutting tools now. Other things we need. By the way, if you have something for sealing scionwood and isopropyl alcohol, keep these the hell away from each other because this is flammable and this is hot. I don't usually have both of them out, except that I might be cutting the ends off my scionwood when I'm trimming it before I seal it with wax, and so I might want to sterilize between batches of scionwood from different trees. Just keep this away from the candle. I put it on a whole separate table so it's not even any chance of being close to a flame. Okay, then we need, show you how this works in a minute. This is a little tool I made for making cleft cuts. I'll show you how it works. If you don't have something handy like this, this is nice. It's got a handle. You can use one of these. This is just a CD. Any old CD will work. Maybe one of those AOL free 400-hour things from 10 years ago. That's something to keep your hands safe while you're working. Sometimes you might find it handy to have a little bit of cheese wax. I have a container with a little ball of it in there. This is just super soft wax. You can very easily mold it and press it onto things to cover up places on the graft junction that are exposed and might dry out. Mostly though, for that we use these plastic tapes. This is something called parafilm. It's 1-inch parafilm, grafting parafilm, and it's just a real stretchy plastic tape. We'll show you how it works in a minute. You wrap it around the wood as you put the grafts together. You wrap that around to hold everything together. That's about $5 a roll, and a roll will last you for a while. But if you're really into it, you might want to give this stuff a try. This is called buddy tape. Looks the same really, but it's not. This has little perforations in it, so you just pull a piece off like that. Whereas the parafilm, you kind of tear it, stretch it out till it breaks. The buddy tape is thinner and it's stretchier, and it is so nice to work with this stuff. But it's about $30 a roll. However, this is like 800 grafts worth, so you know, even if you're doing production For a small nursery or something, you wouldn't go through that much of it. And then label. I use these little embossable aluminum labels. All you need is a ballpoint pen. So if you're grafting a particular variety, like this one that I showed you is golden russet, you should make yourself a label. So every tree, or maybe you do with a bundle of trees, it'll say right on there, golden R, I put golden russet, and then below that it says M111, which is the kind of rootstock I'm using. And then inside the box that these come in, there are these little wires, stick them through the holes, and then you can twist the wire so it's hanging on the tree. Good idea to identify things one way or another. You could use colored string, you could do all kinds of things, string with knots in it, but you want to record, if you do that, so that you know what things are what. It's super easy to lose track of what cultivar you put on what rootstock, and it gets all mixed up. So keep things labeled, and then maybe even keep a record in a little notebook. I do that a lot. So every graft I do actually get the serial number 20-001, the first one for this year. And then I can look it up and see exactly what it was. I'll even keep track of where I got the scionwood. But anyway, so we're going to do 2 grafts here. We'll do a cleft graft, which is probably the easiest and safest one. I'm going to stand back and just hold up this rootstock for you. This is what you get usually. It's cutting. They take a piece of last year's wood, stick it in the ground. It roots. They may put some rooting hormones on it and stuff. It roots, grows. We end up with this fairly minimal root system, but a big long shoot or stem or stick here. And so with M111, it's actually a good idea to graft fairly close to the ground to avoid something called burnouts, but you know, do whatever's convenient so that you get the hang of it. Usually, if you look at this stuff, you can see a place where the color kind of changes right about there. It's oranger to that side, it's greener to that side. This is about where the soil level was. We want to graft above that, but we don't have to graft very far above that, like a couple inches like this is fine. So I'm going to take this piece of M111, cut it a few inches above the ground. For some of the rootstocks that are propagated by cuttings, like M111, people will sometimes hang on to these, even dip them in a rooting hormone, and then stick them in the ground somewhere and see if they root. You might get some free rootstocks that way the next year. But for now we have this thing. It's a whole lot shorter. This is what we're going to put the cleft in. So I put it through the hole in my little holder here, and we're going to make a cut straight down the axis, right in the middle. I'm not going to do it quite yet. I want to remind you that you can also stick a CD on there. The whole point of these things is that you're making this cleft against about where your hand is, and you don't want to cut your hand. So if you have something in the way, that is a real good idea. Before we get to cutting the scionwood and putting them together, I need to show you a couple pictures. So I'm going to share the screen. Here we go. All right, so this is a picture, a close-up of a cleft graft, actually. And what it shows, besides how these things fit together nicely, is different layers of stuff within the wood. And I'm not sure how well, if this thing shows the cursor that I have on the screen or not, but if it doesn't, I've got some stuff kind of drawn onto the next version, so let's just show that. There we go. All right, so layers of material. There's this wood inside. This is young wood. There's the bark on the outside. And right between them is the cambium. And the cambium is kind of where all the action is for growing. It's growing new wood to the inside. It's growing new bark to the outside. These are very young, so the wood and the bark both are quite thin, actually. But it's these cambium layers, red on this side on the rootstock, blue on this side on the scion, those need to knit together. Those need to grow together. And so our job is to put our grafts together in such a way that those cambial layers match as perfectly as possible. Now, it can be somewhat forgiving. If they even intersect somewhere, sometimes that's good enough. but we want to give every advantage to the grafts that we make. So cambium is important to know, and in a practical sense, we can't look at our stuff up that close. We're matching as best we can where we assume the cambium must be based on where the bark is. And you can find that out by, let's go back to here for a second. All right, and you can find that out by, here's a little piece that I trimmed, some other ones too. Let's cut another piece of this scionwood. I'm going to cut it at an angle here. Where is the cambial tissue? Well, one handy thing to do is just take a little slice of wood, whether it's the rootstock or your scionwood, little splinter thing hanging off there, and with your thumbnail you can just peel a little bark off. That gives you a sense of how thick the bark is, and the cambium is what's right under it. So if you do that with your rootstock and with your scionwood, you kind of get a sense of exactly where it is, and you can match them up more easily.